Why would her mother have even wanted to be reconciled with a brother whose cruelty had driven her from her home in the first place? It wasn't as if her mother had been unhappy with her new life. In fact, Deb remembered her as being full of love both for her daughter and for her husband, Gerald O'Hara, actor and manager of the Lambeth Players. Deb, too, had loved her caring and intelligent stepfather dearly. But 2 years ago had come a fresh blow, for Gerald had fallen prey to a debilitating lung sickness that had left the responsibility of the Players to her.
"No, you can't leave me in charge, Gerald. I'm too young,"
she'd pleaded as she crouched by his sickbed, feeling frightened and alone.
"Oh, don't die,"
she'd murmured under her breath to the man who'd truly been a father to her.
"Please, don't you leave me as well."
"You can do it, my brave lass." Even though Gerald was desperately weak by then, he'd reached to clasp her hand tightly. "You've been holding the company together ever since my damned sickness started. Don't think I haven't noticed how everybody comes to ask for your opinion. Ask Miss Deb, they say. She'll know."
"But Francis Calladine, shouldn't he be in charge? He's the senior actor, and he used to perform at Drury Lane."
"And he never tires of telling everyone so." A wry smile lifted Gerald's wan face. "No, Francis is a fine man for tragedy. But what the people want is entertainment, and you have an instinct for providing it. In addition, you can act every bit as well as any of those fancy ladies at Drury Lane."
"But to be in charge, Gerald, I couldn't."
"One day," Gerald interrupted. "You'll take London by storm, my lass. One day." He'd begun coughing again, and Deb, distraught, had held a glass of water to his lips. The Lambeth Players were no more than a humble travelling company, but Deb and Gerald dreamed of establishing themselves in London, and a rich backer was the answer, Gerald had often told her. A rich and generous backer who would buy them a lease for one of the numerous small theatres on the edge of the city. "It needn't be a fancy affair," Gerald said, "but think, Deb, of the plays we could put on in our very own place." The rest of the actors were content with touring the usual theatrical circuits every year, setting up their stage at fairs and race meetings to entertain the crowds with their varied miscellany of comedies, songs, and drama. Shakespeare was always a favourite of Gerald's, but an ancient statute forbade minor theatrical companies like theirs to perform any Shakespeare play in full, so Gerald O'Hara had taught his players to pick out prime scenes only. Macbeth and the Three Witches, Henry V's speech before the Battle of Agincourt, and the balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet. By starting their shows with brief acts of comedy and acrobatics, Gerald was able to describe their performances as entertainments, and the crowds came in droves. "It's like offering an all-too-brief taste of a banquet," Gerald had once said to Deb, "but some day, when we get that theatre of our own, we'll perform the whole play, and we'll have all of London society at our feet." But then Gerald died. Losing her mother at such a young age had been heartbreaking, but now Deb had to face life without her beloved stepfather, who had been her guide and her inspiration for as long as she could remember. Kneeling by his graveside the day after the funeral, she'd whispered aloud,
"I can't take charge of the Players, Gerald. I know it was your wish, but I'm only 20, and I'm too young. I can't follow you. I simply cannot do it."
She tried to explain as much to the others later that evening, when the Players had gathered in a tavern to solemnly discuss their plans now that Gerald was gone. It was Francis, loyal Francis, who'd raised a cheer for her and called out, "Who else but an O'Hara should be in charge of us all?" And they wouldn't take no for an answer. The Lambeth Players had given her their trust.